On this episode of Trading Fours, we talk to legendary jazz pianist Jeremy Siskind about ways to get more out of your practice sessions. Have you ever felt like your playing is plateauing? Like you've got the chords down, you know your voice sings, melody's great, you can work your way through the lead sheet, but it's just kind of boring. Like if I played Moon River, it might sound like this. Now, it sounds nice. Some people might even pay me to play weddings or something. But I want to sound pro. Well, jazz is so wide and so deep. It's an endless discovery. You can never find the bottom of it. And the people who've come before us, well, they've gotten a lot more under their fingers than we have so far. So what do you do next? When there's so much material to practice and so many different directions to go, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Well, I turn to my books. That's the first place I go. Flip through my books. Can I find anything new, a new technique, something I haven't learned before, something that feels approachable but still pretty hard? I wonder if I can get Jeremy on a phone. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here from sunny California. I am jealous of your California weather being here in Ohio. But tell us a little bit about who you are for those of us who haven't seen you play before.
Yeah, so my name is Jeremy Siskind. I'm a jazz pianist living in Long Beach, California. I'm a college professor at Fullerton College, and I love creating and I love teaching. I love trying to come up with creative ways of helping people kind of reach the next levels in their playing and guiding students.
That's great. And you yourself had quite a remarkable teacher, didn't you? Right, from the book, you studied with the great Fred Hirsch.
Yeah, exactly. And I seeked Fred out because he was just one of my pianistic heroes. Kind of anytime I thought I was hitting a wall of, okay, that's all I'm going to be able to figure out how to do with the piano, I would turn on one of Fred's recordings. And not only would it be complex and, rich and difficult, but it would be emotionally really cutting. And that's what I appreciate maybe more than anything about Fred's playing, is that every time I listen to one of his recordings, there's a real emotion behind it. And it's not just virtuosic, it's not just fast, it's not just played with a beautiful tone, but there's an actual real feeling that it invokes at me. And that's what we're going for as musicians and as artists. But Fred is really insistent on people not being imitators, right? In jazz, of course, we learn through imitation. There's no way around that. I've transcribed 2 solos this week because I want to know what's going on when Chick Corea plays, when, whoever plays. But if you're actually thinking about being an artist, if you're thinking about being more than a student who, kind of is able to fill in the blanks, you're thinking about being a complete original. You're thinking about finding something that you're bringing uniquely to the music. And so you can see behind me, this is Monk. This is a really cool drawing my buddy did of Monk. And he's like kind of the god in a certain way in jazz of really finding your own voice and going your own way, right? Because we couldn't even possibly begin to teach what Monk is doing. He's breaking every single one of our quote unquote rules. And so whenever I approach a tune, when I'm at my best, I'm thinking not only, okay, what are the correct chords? What's the correct melody? What are the techniques? But, what can I bring to this that's uniquely me, that maybe hasn't been done before, that speaks to my past experience or maybe how I'm feeling in that moment? And those are the musical moments that I think are really most valuable.
It's incredible. So who are some of your other inspirations? You mentioned you transcribed 2 solos this week. Would you share with us what those solos were?
Yeah, so one was Chick Corea and the other's Kenny Garrett. 2 different solos on kind of weird blueses. The Chick Corea was on Matrix, just one of the amazing jazz solos of all time. just spectacular playing. And then Kenny Garrett is on a piece of his called Wooden Steps, which is this really weird kind of multi-tonal blues that doesn't make any sense, but is really amazing. And one of my favorite pianists, Kenny Kirkland, speaking of influences, plays piano on that one. But in terms of my other influences, I grew up listening to Oscar Peterson, and I wanted nothing better, and a part of me still wants nothing more than to just really be able to play that 4/4 swing and bring that joy that Oscar brings to his music. Other favorite pianists, Hank Jones. I love his elegance, his touch, his taste, the way that he can take a tune and without completely tearing it down, just make it special and make it colorful and make it unique. Obviously, Bill Evans is one of the greats. I love some modern players like Keith Jarrett. His album, The Melody at Night with You, is everything that I want to do with ballad playing. I love Brad Meldau. I think, Brad is another student of Fred Hirsch, and probably more than anybody, he's done so much to revolutionize the way that we conceptualize the piano in the last 20 or 30 years.
Speaking of Brad, that's the solo I'm transcribing at the moment. Is the end of his Blackbird solo, which is one of my favorite recordings. It's beautiful, but his.
I transcribed that in college. It was so great.
Yeah, the ending of that is incredible. Yeah, but I'm learning so much just from going through that, right? So, okay, so would you be willing to play something for us? I'm just trying to sit with that for a second. That's amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Incredible. I heard so many interesting things. This I think what's going through my head right now is exactly what I'm trying to convey with this video, which is what you just played had so many techniques that you've clearly spent your life working on. I mean, everything. I heard chromatic bass line in the beginning, an immediate reharmonization. It wasn't a reharm of the chords, but it was the voicing the chords to keep the chromatic lines. Clearly, you think a lot, maybe instinctively at this point, about voice leading between the voices, and wow. Again, you do this now. You do this now instinctively, and I have to say, I've never heard bebop lines over Moon River before.
You still haven't.
And then a little bit of your Oscar flair in there with the 2-octave melody lines and those big sus chord arpeggios at the end. Wow. I mean, so this is I think where a lot of my students and myself struggle is like, where do you go? I mean, you heard the clip that I sent you earlier of how I would play Moon River. What kind of things could I do to just move a little bit in the direction of where you are, to add a little sophistication, add a little bit of my own flavor into that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, let me say I totally understand your feeling, because I think everybody listens to the people who they hear as being that level up from them, and it just seems like this crazy, expansive, like, how am I going to get there? It's really intimidating. So, it's difficult. It's difficult for me, to guide my students and to guide myself to try to level up. Because one of the things that I don't know if you've noticed this, but the better that you get, the harder progress is to see.
Yes, so much. Yeah, so much.
And it's rough, especially with jazz. You have it's so just, you have to have so much trust that the work that you're doing is actually making an impact. Yeah, I always tell my students that it's actually like a good sign when you feel your playing getting like a little bit worse, because it means that you've I compare it to like lifting weights, which obviously I don't do much, but you lift weights and you have to break the muscle, right? And then it builds back up because you broke it. And it's the same way that you have to kind of sacrifice a little bit of comfort level to then grow. And I see this all the time with my students, that they're so stressed about sounding good in that moment that they don't actually take those steps, those chances, those leaps to push themselves in order to grow. So that would be my first piece of advice I guess, is that, if you're always sounding good, you're always feeling comfortable, then you're probably staying where you are, right? And especially, I think, in my book, one of my practice tips is that if you sound good when you're practicing, like, it's not a good practice session. Like, if other people are around and they're like, oh, that's not, man, I really enjoyed listening to you practice, you're doing something wrong. Right? Practicing should be difficult. It should be repetitive. It should be, kind of overly doing something. So once you get to that point where, you're willing to kind of take that leap of going back to go forward a little bit, I would advise to take something small, not get overwhelmed, because, I listen to Brad Mehldau and I'm just like, what the like, I'm never going to be able to do this. There's too many things. He's too good. The technique, the musicality, the reharmonization, the rhythm, like, it's overwhelming. So instead, you just want to pick on one thing, one technique. So I'll give you the example of something that I did recently, and maybe it's advanced. I don't even know, but I listened to this Benny Green recording and I heard him playing the melody in the thumb of the right hand in a chord over it. And I thought that was really cool. I hadn't really heard anybody do that before. So, if I'm playing Moon River, I'm playing the melody here. And I was like, wow, I never really thought to do that. But it's it's different. I think it's kind of neat. And so then what I would do from there, once you've chosen a little concept like that, the next thing that I'll do is I'll just try to apply it to tunes. And it might be the kind of thing, and I do this all the time, where if it's difficult, I write out a bunch of things first. Here's 5 different ways I might do that with the beginning of Moon River. Or maybe it's more spread out. Or maybe It's like contrapuntal. I don't know. Right, or maybe it's super chromatic and weird. Right. And I actually love that, and now I'm going to play Moon River. And now that's kind of cool. I love that vibe. Right, so I'm just going to take it and I'm going to experiment. And, hopefully this isn't a brag. Like, I'm at the point where I can at least fake doing that immediately. But I've been at the point, and I'll still encounter concepts where I have to write out and learn a bunch of versions first. There's this thing with jazz that, is part of improvising, that we create and we perform at the same time, right? That's the gig.
Right.
But in terms of practice, that's not always practical. Right? Sometimes we just have to really sit down and do the math and think about theory and be like, okay, so if I want this to be chromatic, I'm going to use that chord, and really think about it and then learn how to play it. And so I really recommend, whenever you're learning something new, write it out. So figure out a bunch of ways to do it on Moon River, and then go to 5 other tunes. Take Autumn Leaves and be like, okay, I really like that chromatic thing on Moon River. I wonder if that'll actually sound good on Autumn Leaves too. This is weird. Okay, I don't like that, but maybe I'd like a whole tone thing. Okay. Keep going, more tunes. And this is the point at which you're overdoing it, right? And that's what practice is, right? If you're learning a new word and you want to remember it, you got to force it into conversation all the time.
I love that idea of pushing things kind of beyond what their practical limits are, and then listening back, and finding new things and new inspiration in what you just played. And maybe you don't perform with it pushed quite as far as you did in your practice, but a little bit of that becomes a flavor of your playing going forward.
Yes, absolutely. Just like anytime that you're trying to make a new habit, you're going to really focus on it. You're going to really do it all the time for the first however long. And then it's just going to become part of your life. So if I'm playing Moon River, you hear there, I put the melody at the bottom. And so then you actually have to practice that. You have to practice, okay, I'm not going to do it all the time, but I'm going to try to insert it in a way that's tasteful. So then you actually practice kind of performing as you might do it. And so one of the things to notice, and I think it's important, it's easy to get caught up in exercises. When I teach my students kind of closed position block chords, you got to do this. You got to do these major scales. I should practice it more before I demonstrate. Whatever, not in D flat. Right, you've got to know those scales. But I try to go as quickly as I can to tunes. And there's kind of 2 reasons. The first is that you can practice scales forever. Once you do your major scales, you can go to your minor scales, then your modes, and not actually get good at putting it into music. So I prefer to do some of those kind of warm-up activities and then figure out a few tunes. And there might be some of these concepts that you can only do on a few tunes. Mm-hmm. I do this thing called mirror piano, in which the hands go opposite directions. And I have a few tunes that I know these are my mirror piano tunes. When I play Olio, right? And then your brain also, once you start applying it, your brain starts to pick it up and be able to insert it into other places. And that's just kind of, you have to trust that process to happen a little bit. Now, that's not an excuse not to work hard. And with my block chords, I applied it not only to tunes, but I learned transcriptions with my block chords. And, I learned bebop heads with my block chords. And I still have a lot of work to do with my block chords. But to me, it's not a matter of mastering every single exercise as it is to start applying it soon and trust that your brain will get good at putting it, in some places where it wasn't before.
Yeah, I think this is something I hear a lot of pianists talk about filling their bag of tricks, right? And I think to a lot of beginning pianists, that means getting muscle memory around different techniques and things. But as you get more advanced, right, that bag of tricks becomes more like something you hear in your head that your fingers just know how to play when you hear it. Though in your book, right, I'm a big fan of the book. I'm really appreciative.
This book?
Yeah, and I have the fancy one with your autograph in it. Thank
Only
you.
available at jeremysiskind.com.
All right, we'll send everybody to jeremysiskind.com. No, but I have a library full of jazz books. Most of them teach the same things, right? A lot of them teach, the standard voicing techniques and how to sound like Bill Evans versus whatever, right? But your book is very different than that. I mean, starting about maybe a third of the way through the book, you focus on Danny Boy, and every little technique that you teach, you apply on top of Danny Boy, and you put it through all these different styles. And I think that's so relevant to what we're talking about here. What was it that motivated you to write this 180 page book, which is going to take me years to work through? It's the best $20 I've ever spent. What motivated you to write a book?
So I've been writing books for a publishing company called Hal Leonard for quite a while. And so I've gotten to know the book industry. And one of the things that's struck me is that people who are trying to sell books would like nothing better than to have a jazz method book that takes students from like not knowing anything about jazz to being
like the Suzuki jazz method or something.
Whoever.
Right.
But it just doesn't work because as we kind of discussed, there's so many different paths to take. There's so many ways to go. And jazz is not a thing that can be learned from A to Z. It's got to be, each individual taking their own experience. That said, I think there's a lot of room for, particular subjects. And I never found a book written about solo jazz piano specifically because it's so hard. There's so many things that it can be. And I'm really passionate about solo piano. I love the great solo pianists, and I just love the possibilities that are in this instrument. So my goal with this book was to kind of take that small section, right? Not trying to deal with playing with a big band or playing with a trio or playing duo with a vocalist, just like, okay, what have people done solo piano? And how could we organize them and quantify them in a way that's hopefully, still artistic and leaves a lot of room for interpretation and individuality, but lets people know, okay, here's what stride piano is. Here's how you operate when you play a bass line in your left hand. Here's the different kinds of bass lines. Here's how you learn an ostinato, and try to put all of those techniques that I kind of love and I love working on into one book. I like to say that I'm uniquely qualified to have written this book, having been a study of Fred Hirsch, who's arguably the greatest solo pianist of the last however many years. And I've, not to brag, but I've won a couple of big jazz solo piano competitions myself. So I just really wanted to put everything that I know into a book and put it out in the world for people. And the response has been really overwhelming. It seems to be something that people actually kind of wanted in their life. So I'm really thrilled.
I'm really appreciative of the lessons in the book, and you're taking the time to come and share a little bit about it with us today. Where can people go buy this book if they want to buy it? You said...
So it is available on Amazon. If you can't get it any other way, you can get 50% of the money from Jeff Bezos. But what I would really love is if you bought a signed copy from me at jeremysiskind.com. It's spelled like jeremysiskind.com. And I'll very gladly send it to you, either signed in a physical form or in a PDF form, which is a little cheaper.
We will send everybody to jeremysiskind.com to pick up the book. Thank you again so much for the time. I appreciate it. And your rendition of Moon River made my day. It's beautiful playing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right.